Welcome to the Pitfalls of Perfect Worlds, where we're going to dig into what might be imperfect about perfection. My name is Ruoxi Chen, she, her. I'm an editor at Tor.com Publishing, and I will be your moderator today. I'd love to welcome these wonderful authors to the panel. We have Becky Chambers, author of A Psalm for the Wild Built. We have Djeli Clark, author of A Master of Djinn. Kerstin Hall, author of Star Eater. And Catherynne M. Valente, author of Comfort Me with Apples. Before we get into the meat of things and start really contemplating the darkness of like, does perfection even exist, especially in the year of our Lord 2021 or everything we've all been through, I just wanted to start with some quick fire questions just to get everyone warmed up. So it'll just be a like X or Y, and if you could all go around and answer in order just so the audience can kind of get to know you a little bit, that would be great. So starting with Becky, tea or coffee?
Tea, definitely.
Sort of a trick question for you. And on to Fenderson.
Coffee.
And I think we've got Kerstin next, tea or coffee?
Definitely tea.
Definitely tea. And finally, Kat, tea or coffee?
Coffee, absolutely.
So we're evenly, I'll be the tiebreaker. I am a coffee like addict probably in an unhealthy way, but all forms of caffeine are valid. And dragons or witches, same order, if anyone has strong opinions.
Dragons.
Yeah, dragons. Or a dragon witch would be perfect.
Witches. I think I'm partial to witches.
Witches can make dragons.
But a dragon witch.
A dragon witch can make dragons and witches, presumably. So, no wrong answers here, but I love the sort of organic split that's happening. And finally, since all of you are absolutely brilliant authors who have written in both formats, not to put you on the spot, but novellas or novels?
Gonna get me in trouble. I'm gonna say novels, but that's just because I don't know when to stop.
Yeah, I'm gonna say novels as well because my novellas were just short stories. It just went way too long.
Yeah, I feel the same. I'm gonna not do the tie situation this time. I'm also gonna say novels.
I realize I have two novellas coming out this year, but it's novels for me. I've lost the skill of brevity.
It is. I feel like novels is maybe like the answer of the last year where you just want something like 1,200 pages to like sink into and go into another world so you can kind of escape whatever is happening in your own. So thank you all for kind of setting the stage. I now desperately want to see a book or movie or some form of media with a dragon witch in it. So anyone on this panel and anyone listening, let's get working on that as the new subgenre. And I guess speaking of escaping from the world that we live in, just starting with the broadest question that is the theme of the panel, for all of you, in terms of the way that you craft your world building, your books range from maybe our world or a version of our world to totally secondary world. What does perfection mean to you? And then how did it factor into the way that you crafted the world of each of these books?
Perfection to me is an impossible quality. I think that there's no such thing, and trying to find something that ticks every single box on the list is just, it's a bit crazy making, and you're never gonna get there. I think in terms of building a utopian world or a world that feels pretty good, you have to leave some room for imperfection. That sounds counterintuitive maybe, but I think that the way to make a good feeling place feel believable is if it still has problems, because otherwise anything else is going to feel, it's going to feel sugar-coated, it's going to feel false. So to me, it's something you can maybe get close to, but you'll never actually get there.
Yeah, I have to agree with Becky. I don't know that perfection is a thing that can be attained. I don't even know if it should be attempted to be attained. I think in my own world building, normally those who are seeking perfection are often the villains. Like, let's say a certain megalomaniac clockwork angel in a story I wrote, right? They're seeking perfection, and often to get to that level of perfection, they have to erase a lot of the bumps and imperfections that make society and make people or whatever beings that I have complex in what they are. And so, yeah, perfection to me is, it's interesting to try to attain it, but to me, it's often scary what people might go through to create that.
Piggybacking a little bit off Becky's point, saying that perfection is an impossible quality, I think there's something about perfection that makes it an artificial quality. So the more perfect something seems, the more suspect I feel it is. So I think in my work, things look quite pretty on the surface, but it's very apparent that like surface level attractiveness of things is built on something far darker and more unpleasant. So yeah.
I think what Kerstin said is really right on. You know, readers and viewers are pretty savvy these days. So if you set up something that seems really nice, they're immediately looking for whatever creepy crawlies are going underneath it, because we all know how stories work. But I mean, when you set out to create a perfect anything, for somebody it will be imperfect. You know, there's a whole portion of our country that looks back at the 1950s as this utopian time, and some of that part of the country is Hollywood, and presents this sort of beautiful suburban streets and everyone knows their place. And in fact, that was a nightmare world for another huge part of this country. And so dealing with what makes perfection for some people, by definition, makes imperfection, deep, dire imperfection for others, is not something you can get too far away from.
And Kat, you magically helped me like segue into another question that I had here for all of you. But just this, I love that all of you also brought up sort of utopia and dystopia in relation to perfection. And I feel like especially utopia and perfection are often paired side by side. And I think this is a critic writing on Ursula K. Le Guin who said utopia is not perfection. Utopia is a process. So for each of you in your sort of disparate and varying worlds, I guess like what is the perfection and what is the process, and then how do you see utopia relating to the perceived perfection for your characters or for your worlds? You know, feel free to go off on setting or as broad or as specific as you like.
I think that definition is spot on, because no solution is ever going to be final, and it's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be permanent, right? So in my new book, A Psalm for the Wild Build, it takes place on this moon that is, I think, pretty close to a utopian situation, or at least I tried to make it so. Your mileage may vary. But one of the things that was important to me in the world building was to make sure that it wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach, that there are different cultures within this population. They have different technologies, they have different cultural values, they have different ways of doing things. Everything works fairly harmoniously. There are problems and things that need ironing out. But the idea that you can take there is only one utopia that works for everyone, it's never going to happen. This is a living, breathing, changing world. They're always moving forward. They're always ironing things out as they need to be, and they're not afraid to throw things away when they no longer work. Maybe something that worked for a previous generation isn't applicable anymore. And so I do think that in order for a utopia or a near utopia to be successful, there has to be flexibility within that. There has to be malleability. There has to be a willingness to evolve and adapt, because otherwise all you get is, stagnancy and fascism and just all these, rigid, horrible things that are so often the, the doom of societies like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of my own work in the quote unquote Dead Djinn universe. Roshi, you know what it came up what it took to come up with that with that title. It's interesting that I've seen some people actually comment, is this alternate, steampunk Egypt, or they've commented and simply said it's a utopia. And I said, well, it's not really a utopia. But, I was aiming for a bit of anti-colonialism, even post-colonialism in what I was making here, behind all of the steampunk and the bowlers and everything else. This is my little wink and nod commentary. And so there's something to be said about the fact that I suppose in this alternate world where colonialism goes awry and we can see what a post-colonial society might look like, it's tempting to call that a utopia, because the alternative itself, we know the horrors of the alternative, right? And so if the horrors of colonialism are one thing, then something that subverts that may feel like a utopia. But what I was also aiming for here was a bit of our own history, that in the post-colonial moment throughout the world, after World War II, there were all of these new nations coming that had all these dreams and hopes, and they didn't always turn out exactly as they thought, right? It turned out that human beings still had to deal with all of these other issues, the lingering issues of colonialism, or simply the regular interpersonal conflicts that humans have. And so the world that I've created here in this alternate Egypt, certainly, yes, it's post-colonial in its own way, but it still has to deal with all of the various issues people can think about of class and gender and everything else. And so, is it perfect? No. Is it a utopia? I wouldn't say that either. It's simply, but maybe utopia is a relative, right? It's simply an interesting dream of what could be, where in this case, you have a post-colonial society that is able to, it has the power to try to choose its own destiny, rather than having external influences, push it along, as happened in our world. So, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't describe the world of Star Eater as utopic beyond the surface level. And I think that there's different factors within the book. Different people regard the idea of utopia as rather different and have different aims and ways of bringing it about. And the negative or antagonistic forces in the book kind of align their vision of utopia with stasis and stagnation and tradition and things remaining the same and being able to preserve them. Whereas the other forces don't necessarily have the same kind of vision, but are more willing to embrace brokenness and disorder in the service of justice. So I think the idea of utopia is definitely a contested thing. And that contestation can be used to say various things. And I hope that my work does say various things. But I think what I was really going for as like the net good of change in the society would be the ability to make choices. Which in a stagnant society isn't necessarily possible.
Yeah. So Come For Me With Apples is actually a really tough book to talk about without giving away the sort of big reveal. So I'm going to dance very delicately. I think perfection is a process could be a tagline for the book, to be perfectly honest. It is a definitional utopia, and one of the ways that we can see the terrible things that will be done in order to create perfection is through homeowners associations, which is kind of a big part of what goes on in Come For Me, because it's the world's worst homeowners association. And I think that it's a really mundane thing in the real world. But if you look up those contracts, if you don't happen to live in a gated homeowners HOA community, which I do not, it's evil. It's pure evil. What will be done to create that picture perfect Hollywood street? And what the punishments will be. You will be punished for being insufficiently perfect. Is just dystopia in this beautiful, horrible little crystal ball. And that was a big part of what I wanted to access with Come For Me was, somebody, Sophia is the protagonist, who absolutely does not understand the problems that are being created in order to create her world. That she floats through it, not understanding that it was made for her and for her benefit, and that others are suffering. And so that kind of process, as we said, of perfection peeling away is sort of the meat of the book. And I think that a lot of books kind of either start from we have this perfect world and it gets broken, or we have this broken world and we're striving for its perfection. That motion in and out of utopia and dystopia is the engine of a lot of fiction, particularly science fiction.
Absolutely, and I think that I love what you said about just the fact that these, when you dig into the contracts, like they seem like they're driving a certain sort of perfection and a certain sort of standard, but there's always evil lurking somewhere, right? And in terms of and it's so much about the presentation specifically for an HOA, which is I think something that echoes across all of your books. So this next point is sort of more directed, I think, towards Kat's and Becky's books, but the question of niceness and kindness, which are two not opposing, like very similar things, but I think, you know, there have been conversations about the difference between the two, how they operate toward each other and who they are meant for. And Kerstin and Fenderson, feel free to obviously jump in to talk here as well. But I guess in Comfort Me with Apples, which is pitched as Gone Girl meets Spinning Silver, it feels to me, at least in reading it, that their niceness is sort of the dominant thing that is being striven for there, whether or not there's a real cost to that. And then in A Psalm for the Wild-Built, kindness seems to be really what everyone is going after. So for each of you, did you consider that sort of, I don't know if it's a binary, but as you were crafting these books and these characters, how did you see those two concepts interact and also interact with this idea of utopian perfection?
I'm not sure anybody in Psalm is nice. I think that's exactly it. The first thing that came to mind was some lyrics from the musical Into the Woods. You know, you're not good, you're not bad, you're just nice. Niceness to me, not that, you know, it has to be a bad thing, but it does have this quality of being sort of a polish you put on something. You know, it's a coat of paint, really. And somebody can be nice and kind. These can go hand in hand. But kindness to me is a very genuine thing, and I guess, like Utopia, is a process. It's something about meeting somebody where they're at, really understanding what it is they need. Niceness to me says that, you know, here are the social rules we're going to follow to make it look all nice and shiny. Kindness is really sitting and listening and understanding what it is that you can do to help. So it is something that takes time and effort and a willingness to step out of your own expectations and to admit that you might be wrong, or that you know, what you intuit as being, you know, an inextricable need is maybe not what that person needs. You know, it's really about vulnerability, and sort of, I think the kinder you are, the more willing you are to really pare yourself down, not in a like completely self-sacrificing way, not where you're carving pieces off of yourself, but where you're just doing that dance with someone else in a way that's symbiotic and reciprocal. It's not easy to be kind, I don't think, but I think it's a much better goal than being nice.
I think it probably pays to remember that the original definition long ago of nice was more along the lines of frivolous and stupid. I think that what you said, I mean, Shakespeare uses it to mean stupid. It's legit. But what you were saying about you know, things are nice in Apples and kind in Becky's books, I think is really true. Everyone is powerfully nice to Sophia, but it is an oppressive niceness, and it is a required niceness, and she does not understand that it isn't kindness, and that's kind of where her tragic pitfall is. And that there is one moment where that niceness attempts to turn into genuine kindness, and she fully doesn't understand that there has been a change. I think niceness is social lubricant, whereas kindness, profound kindness, real kindness, is a truly subversive act and can be disruptive in a good way to the social order. We don't genuinely treat each other with kindness that often, particularly if we don't know each other well. Kindness tends to be something we reserve for our monkey circle. But showing it to people outside, that feels radical because it is. And there has been so many, moments where just plain human kindness is what turns the tide of one thing or another in the real world. And in stories and in Apples, we're talking about the HOA and everything. Like, there is a whole world of be demographically sensitive here. Wealthy white people who have weaponized niceness, and that's the whole bless your heart thing. Like, we all know what that means. It doesn't mean bless your heart. It's neither nice nor kind. But keeping that front of niceness, keeping that big smile and everything is perfect, and aren't you wonderful, and aren't I wonderful, and all of those things. There is a whole circle that has learned to weaponize that over the decades, and it's a big part of what Apples explores, is that weaponized niceness, which has absolutely nothing to do with kindness at all.
I love that idea of the weaponized niceness, that has the real edge to it, because I feel like I see that in all 4 of your books, that there are characters who are playing who maybe have no interest in kindness or in truly being subversive, because they want to keep that status quo. And so to kind of go from the more, I don't want to say subtle, but the more one-to-one social interactions to more systemic. This next one is more directed at Kerstin and Fenderson, but same thing with Kat and Becky. If something occurs to you, please do jump in. I want to talk about systems and perfection, and then this persistent idea of niceness and kindness, where in Master of Djinn, it's Cairo, but not our Cairo. And as you so eloquently put it, it's Cairo. It's a post-colonial Cairo with Djinn and magic, and this is a world that's kind of turned on its head from what we expect. And Kerstin in Star Eater, there is a sort of perfect-ish order. Women are in charge. It's matriarchal, but the magic system is also fueled by the eating of one's loved ones to stay in the sky, and people are being cast off into the abyss. So you have these really fascinating worlds here. And cost feels like it's at the center of both. So for both of you, I guess what is the breaking point in terms of the cost in each of your worlds? And is that cost something really concrete, or is it a concept like niceness or kindness, and as your characters kind of float through them?
That's a deep question. I have to sit with that. I feel like I need another cup of coffee. No, I mean, I suppose when I think about cost in this world I've created, I mean, one of the things is that with magic back, there is this understanding of balance, right? Okay, we have magic, we can do all of these things, but it does come at this cost, right? Having Djinn back and any wielding of magic comes at its own cost. And it's a seductive thing that people may want because they can get something they want, but there's always this thing that you have to pay for, right? The magic demand abhors a vacuum, and it's going to demand something. If you've taken something from the world, you're going to have to do something to put it back. And there's also a similarity there. What's playing out here is, this is also a post-industrial Cairo. And so there's also the issues of industrialization and what it's done now with all of this modernity, what it's done to the larger society as people move from villages and rural areas to the city and are now, often in slums or what have you, and dealing with all of the problems that come with industrial society. And so there's also that notion as well that this is a Cairo that certainly is, quote unquote, modernized. It's got all of these lofty things, but it also has this underbelly, right? Because this is part of the cost of this. And it is often, I don't want to give away the whole plot as well, but part of this is that someone's now here asking about what's the cost of what's happened, right? Not everyone is sharing in this equally in this new glorious Cairo. So what is the cost for that? And so, it's one of the things that I would say that people deal with in this world constantly. It's again, this is why I say, it's not a perfect world, and it's not actually utopia. It is a world in which people still have to deal with those issues.
Yeah, I think the costs in Star Eater are fairly concrete. You have your literal pound of flesh. Yeah, I think that obviously the people that are responsible for maintaining and upholding the order of this island bear the brunt of that cost, and that they are the ones eating and being eaten. But the civilian population also is impacted by the violence that they're enacting, in that their choices are also curtailed and they have fewer options, and sometimes they feel like that was something I was playing with a lot, about who has to bear the costs of perfection and utopia, and what that takes out of the equation, and who isn't acknowledged in those paradigms. But it's interesting that you mentioned that my world could be conceived as utopic because it's matriarchal. Because that was never something I actively set out to achieve. I think there's a lot of like girl power sentiment, like if women were in charge, everything would be great. And like, no, I don't think that would be the case. Maybe better, but perhaps not utopic. And in writing this book, one of the people that read it in an earlier iteration advised that I make my power structures, because they were matriarchal, more feminine. And that was something that I did not do. That didn't work for me, because I think power operates in the same ways regardless of who wields it. Like there is something equalizing about power, I suppose. The people in charge, who have a vested interest in remaining in charge, behave in consistent ways, I think. So I wouldn't say that the matriarchal aspect of my society is necessarily utopic. It's more, I felt like writing a lot of female characters, and this gave me a very easy way to do it. So yeah.
I'm very glad that you did not take that piece of advice in terms of crafting that structure. And in hearing you both talk about sort of pushing and pulling against like the expectations of setting up each of these worlds, makes me really think about how each of these books is in such a distinct subgenre. And I'm going to give a super quick like logline rundown. I know loglines are both like the enemy and the beloved of every author, because they are sort of by nature kind of reductive, but they do help people get a grasp. So forgive me for just like going through the sort of most basic X meets Y. So for Kat, I think I already mentioned Comfort Me with Apples was pitched as Gone Girl Meets Spinning Silver. For Kerstin, we pitched Star Eater as Margaret Atwood by way of Dungeons and Dragons. And for Becky, your editor, Lee Harris, described the world you crafted to me as the Totoro of sci-fi fantasy, because it is about tea monks and this sort of post-utopia and robots and so much kindness. And Dexter, I think we've been calling Master of Djinn a post-colonial fantasy procedural where there is a murder mystery, but there is decolonization, but at what cost, and how do you reckon with that? So for all of you, you're obviously subverting these subgenres that I've just described here, but I guess is the act of subversion an attempt at perfecting those subgenres also, to get back to our general theme of the panel, and how did you tackle having to exist within this existing genre or subgenre, and how did that feed into your process of writing each book and creating each book?
For me, I'm not, well, I mean, I guess that anytime you branch off in a new, I mean, all fiction is subversive of something or other, right? We're all building off of whatever it is we've eaten beforehand and trying to put our own spin on it. So for me, I mean, I would describe Psalm as being solarpunk. And the nice thing about solarpunk is that it's a very new concept, which means you can kind of do whatever you like with that. There's not a lot to build from yet. I feel like solarpunk as a concept, as a genre, as an aesthetic, really is something that's still being defined and felt out. So really for me, it was just a matter of exploring what that meant, what it meant to tell a story that was something that was intended as like a polar opposite to, say, cyberpunk, in which you have your high-tech dystopian future. How do we tell a high-tech utopian future in which everything is working in concert with nature, as opposed to being discordant? I mean, I think that in and of itself is subversive, in that we tend to see technology and nature as being fundamentally opposed to each other. So flipping that and saying, how do they actually make each other better, is inherently, one of those questions that takes the script and spins it around. I like to think anyway.
Yeah, I think with a Master of Djinn, I mean, the subversion is there in the, first of all, in the very notion of, this is my attempt again to look at anti-colonialism and post-colonialism. So I think there's that. And of course, we're using steampunk by, taking it out of it's not always in a Victorian setting, but certainly that is what people tend to have in mind. Often it's one of the first things that comes to people's minds, what they think of. In fact, I've had people tell me like, oh, I didn't think of steampunk outside of this. I said, I'm not the first to do this, but I'm glad you've seen something different. And so in that sense, I think my work attempts to subvert things that way. And the rest is just, me kind of doing little jokes here and there, where I try to poke fun at tropes that we take way too seriously or that we have angst about. So I go throughout doing that.
Star Eater is secondary world fantasy with a bit of horror. A lot of people seem to have decided that it's also science fiction, and I would like to clarify that it's not. I think people just think it's fun to say cannibal nuns in space. They are not in space. So I really love secondary world fantasy. I think it's a really fun playground because anything can go. And I think that a lot of fantasy of the secondary world type can be fairly formulaic, but it really doesn't have to be. So I don't know to what extent I subverted it. I hope I just expanded it a bit. I just think fantasy gives you the tools to have a very large playground, a very large sandpit, that you don't necessarily have to be entirely confined by what you've seen in the genre that's come before you. And I don't think I am, so I'm hoping that that'll show.
So subverting tropes is a huge part of what I do, and getting mad at a trope and wanting to stomp on it is the source of many, many books that I've written. This is actually probably the hardest question to talk about apples without blowing the whole thing, because what it truly is after, what it's truly subverting, is the thing that I can't tell you about. I don't even want to tell you what kind of like punk epithet it is, because even that is a little bit too much. It is kind of my first murder thriller book, which I'm excited about because I love that genre and I never ever write in it. So there's a lot going on here that I've never done before. And in some sense, it is subverting the tropes of that genre, but it's actually after something else, something mysterious, entirely. And I think what it really is trying to subvert is the stories we tell ourselves about how our world came to be. That the suburbs suck is not a really interesting message anymore. We all know. We've all seen literally every movie of the last 30 years and many, many books as well. That's not really the point. That is the backdrop. But it's what we tell ourselves is immutable about our world and has always been here and always will be here. That Apples is really looking to put a stiletto in the eye of.
Hearing you all incredibly delicately and eloquently talk around like the spoilers in your books it's just such an impressive wire walking feat. It's making me realize how every single one of them is riding on sort of a central mystery and so I'm sorry that we have put you to the challenge of talking in detail about these books that you cannot spoil, but this is also a great reminder to everyone watching this panel. buy these books and read them, so then you can then hear these wonderful people talk about them in full detail. So it makes me realize I should ease up a little bit on asking you questions that are going to, by definition, force you to dance around those topics. But I wanted to talk a little bit about your characters, before we got up these panels, because you have such great casts in each of these books, and part of the reason we have gathered you here today is because they are all, to more or less extent, trying to either understand their worlds or better their worlds, and striving for some sense of perfection, and trying to figure out where it is they sit. So I guess you can give a lighthearted answer or a deep answer. I guess the lighthearted one would be like, what to each of your protagonists would be a perfect day? And then the deeper answer would be, in your writing of them, did the arc being sort of striving for perfection make it more difficult to craft their narratives than sort of a more traditional, let's save the world kind of narrative that you might find in more traditional sci-fi fantasy? So feel free to take either tack on that.
This is a great question, because my protagonist in Song for the Wild-Built sibling, Dex, they're a monk, and they travel the countryside. And I would say that Dex has a lot of perfect days. Dex has a lot of days that they really enjoy, and that I think anyone here would immediately be like, yes, that's outstanding. There was a nap and a bathhouse and like an amazing meal, and you didn't really have any huge responsibilities to worry about. It's great. And this is really, again, I'm going to have to do that dance, but the central conflict or tension really in the story is that Dex does live in a society that is, if not perfect, close to it, works very well, and they have a job that they care deeply about, and they have a lot of days that are beautiful and full of meaning, and they still feel that something is missing. And that's really the driving force of the whole story, is them wrestling with this emptiness, this void that they can't put a name to, and they can't figure out, because materially and socially they're taken care of. So what is it that they still need, is really the thing that anchors their entire story.
Yeah, I think with Fatima from Djinn, for the Master of Djinn, perfect day for her would be, well, she likes her job. She's driven by her job, right? A perfect day would be one where she can go about that job and not be, interrupted by all these other individuals or forces who attempt to do so. So, I think that would be her notion of what a perfect day would be. That, and, a new suit perhaps every hour.
Yeah, like I'm going to take the slightly more facetious route in my character's perfect day. A perfect day for Alfreda would probably involve not doing cannibalism. So I mean, that would probably be number one. She really likes bugs. She's quite into insects. So I guess a day where she got to go, I don't know, sit in a field and play with beetles would probably be up there.
Well, Apples actually starts with Sophia's perfect day, so it's an easy question to answer. She does all the housework. She goes to the market. She serves her husband perfectly. She makes herself beautiful. She prepares the food. It nearly killed me to write this. She's genuinely fulfilled by all of these things, and has no desires for anything but to serve her husband and beautify the world around her as the story begins.
And it is, I can't even imagine how painful it is for you to not spoil the whole thing, because it's on the tip of my tongue right now. I will say no more. I think we are, I wanted to end on sort of a positive recommendation there, because we've kind of run the gamut, I feel like, from all of the ideas of perfection to actual perfection, to just knowing that striving for it is perhaps the best character or any of us can really do. For each of you, what was the last, in your mind, perfect piece of media that you consumed? I know this is asking to choose amongst children, but could be a rewatch, could be something brand new, any form of media. what would you want to send off all of the people watching with today?
I love that I have to answer this first. Let me think. My big comfort read this past year is a book I've read 20,000 times probably. It's Changing Planes by Ursula Le Guin is one of my favorites, and it's something I come back to every few years, and in 2020 it was something I really grabbed onto. It's a beautiful book of short stories, and has shaped me in the way I think about books, like in ways I can't even fathom. So I would definitely recommend that.
Unfortunately, I don't have a perfect thing that I return to. I'm not a person who can watch the same thing over and over again. I tend to go on to the next thing. So I'd love to give something here, but I don't think I'd have one. So I will defer to others.
The only thing that like immediately jumped to my mind, just because I love it so much, is I'm going to say it wrong now, Ancillary Justice by Anne Leckie, just because I just love it. So that's going to be my perfect thing.
Well, you said media, which means I can throw a TV show out there that I keep trying to get everybody to watch forever and ever, and it's Ted Lasso, which is not speculative, and I'm more surprised than anyone that my favorite thing of the last many months is not remotely speculative. But I feel like for us geeks, it takes some push to watch this show, which is ostensibly about a soccer team. It is not really about a soccer team. It is about kindness. Everything we've been talking about with regards to kindness is in this show. It is a gobsmackingly perfect season of television, and I wish everyone would watch it.
I could not have summed it up better, and I heartily co-sign the Ted Lasso rec for anybody looking for just a spot of kindness in their life. And it does have some literary features to it. There's a great scene involving a book recommendation that works out really well. So well, thank you to all of you for joining us today, and thank you to everyone who is watching. Please save us from having to talk about these books without spoiling them, because they are absolutely brilliant. So go out and buy these books and read them. So that is once again Becky Chambers, the author of A Song for the Wild Built, Djeli Clark, author of A Master of Djinn, Kerstin Hall, who wrote Star Eater, and Valente, who wrote Comfort Me with Apples. So these, by the time you see this panel, I think almost all of these will be available, and if not already, then within a couple months. So keep your eyes out. Thank you for joining us, and have a little kindness in your life. Less perfection, more kindness.